Welcome to this episode of Optimal Game State. In this video, we're looking at the ORder Bladeborn Warbands. These are the Underworld models that also have rules for Warcry. In an earlier video, I looked at the rules on how to use these fighters in your Warcry warband, so if you want to know more about that, check out that video. That said, let's get stuck in, as we have a lot to cover. We start with Morgweath's Blade-coven, followers of Myari out for blood. These are notable as we're expecting another Underworlds warband soon enough that will have more Daughters of Cain. They are led by Morgweath, who is a hag queen. She costs 20 points more and gets 4 wounds, reach of 2 and an extra point of crit. She also gets a double ability unique to her, Daughters of the First Temple, which is an amazing extra attack for a nearby Blade-coven fighter. If that was a triple it would be good, as a double it is amazing. Kyrie is a Bloodstalker, but 15 points more for 2 more wounds. Her range attack is high variance. You've only got 2 attacks, and you're fishing for those crits to get those 5 damages. Chimus is a Sister of Slaughter, costing 20 more points, and only getting 2 wounds for that. Lether and Kyrissa are Witch Elves, but cost 30 points more, again for only 2 wounds. So overall, this is really disappointing. Pretty disappointing. Morgweath's ability is great, but the extra cost to have fighters to use it really isn't worth it. Next up are the Chosen Axes, 4 Fire Slayers wielding axes and not much else. They have a double that can be used by any except Fjallgrimnir, their leader, which will add 2 to their attacks for the activation, which is a straight upgrade on the generic Onslaught. Fjallgrimnir is a Auric Runefather with 4 extra wounds, 1 extra hit and 1 extra crit damage, but all that for 55 points. The Runefather has an average damage of 5.5 versus T4, and Grimnir brings it to 7.5, so you'll have to consider whether you think that is worth it. It is roughly a 30% points increase for a 25% more wounds and 25% more damage. Val-Oric Bane is close to a Heartguard Berserker with Broadaxe. He's 10 points more with 2 more wounds, but loses 2 reach and has 1 less strength. Tefk and Mad Magrum are both Volkite Berserkers with 2 more wounds for 20 more points. So, looking at this, I think realistically that we're better off playing this warband as compendium fighters instead. Ylthain's Soulraid. This warband is a bit of a roller coaster. We have a fancy leader, a second in command with a sword and shield, a harpoon fighter, which is always fun, and 2 beasts. The Idoneth Deepkin options are actually quite narrow, so extra options that this warband offer are definitely appreciated. Elathain is a Soul Render, but 35 points cheaper, getting plus 2 wounds and losing just 1 crit damage from his melee. You take the Soul Render for its double, which is a net effect. Elathain loses that, but gets his own version, which is essentially identical. So Elathain is a fantastic option. Since you'll be relying on the ranged weapon rather than the reach weapon, typically damage drops from 6 to 4. If that's not something you're happy with, you always have the option to go back to the Soul Render instead, so this is a straight win. Tamiel's closest equivalent is the Troll, which is the cheapest fighter in the warband. Tamiel is 5 points more, gains 2 more wounds, changes the reach of 2 into a range of 8, and loses 1 attack. His ability is a classic harpoon effect for dribble, so it's a bonus attack and then pull the target back a number of inches equal to the value of the triple. Usually this will be used to pull a fighter out of position, maybe off an objective, into melee with another fighter, or sometimes into lava, which is always fun. Fiorain is essentially a brand new profile for the Idoneth, who skip straight from the Trolls to their Worm Riders. Compared to the Trolls, she is 40 more points, she's plus 1 toughness, double the wounds, and has a much better damage profile, going from their damage of 3 to her damage of 4. Last up we have the 2 critters, again with no equivalent. Doonclaw is tough as hell. Due to his low number of attacks, his damage is merely 3.67, but getting a plus 1 attack from Onslaught will upgrade that to a 5.5, which is pretty good. Spinefin is the same cost as the Troll, but speed 12 and slightly worse damage. These are both beasts, so no carrying treasure, which can be annoying. While they aren't necessarily instant takes, they are meaningful options that have a place. For me, Elathain and Tamiel are the standouts for this warband. A net and a harpoon effect for a total of 235 points is quite decent. Thundrik's Profiteers. Here we have the Catharin Overlord warband. There are a lot of cool options in here, but I'm not really expecting a lot, as the current Catharin Overlords are actually pretty good, and the Move 3 fighters were boosted in this edition. The warband's ability is a triple that gives a bonus attack if they are within 6 inches of Bjorgen and it's round 3 or later. First is Bjorgren Thundrik himself, 25 points more than an Ether Chemist, and 4 more wounds. The range weapons are quite different, but Bjorgren sneaks ahead with 5.5 damage compared to the Chemist's 5.0. The real question then is whether the other fighters getting to use the Warband's ability is worth the extra cost for Bjorgren. Khazgan is an Endrinringer, but costs 30 more. He loses 1 strength, dropping the damage from 5.5 to 4.5, but gains a reach of 2 on his melee weapon, which is nice to have. So he can move his 10 and still attack from safety. Lund is a Grundstock Thunderer, but 20 points more with no other change. Enric is a little bit more interesting. He's an Archnaut with Volley Gun for 40 more points. That's a 50% increase, but he also doubles his attacks, taking him from 2 average damage to 4, and that's pretty good. With a range of 15, he's going to be able to attack most things on the board, and 2 attacks give an average of 8 damage, which should take down a lot of chaff fighters. Garrod is the equivalent of an Archnaut with Axe and Pistol. The Archnaut is a fantastic piece, but that's mostly because it's a mere 50 points. Garrod is 20 points more, and only gets 2 wounds out of that, so he's unfortunately probably a pass. I do have this warband myself, although I've yet to finish painting them. Personally, I'll be running them as a normal fighters, rather than the special fighters from this, Underworlds. Everything here is just costing a little bit more without much benefit, although Einrich Ironhall with that volley gun might be worth considering. Myari's Purifiers. These came in the Dark Chasm box, 4 Lumina Elves in total, a Spellcaster, an Archer, and 2 melee fighters, with 1 with a 2-hander and 1 with a sword. Myari is comparable to the Caligrave, although it is 30 points more. For that, you're just getting 2 wounds. He does get a triple ability, Dazzling Light, which reduces the attack characteristics of nearby enemies, but the Caligrave gets an equivalent, which can be placed anywhere and reduces crits by 1. The Caligrave's effect isn't as good, but it's a double, so it's a lot easier to use. As Myari has a Scout rune mark, this opens up the Sharp-Eyed Scryhawk double, which allows him to increase the attacks against the target. This is particularly good if you're using range attacks that can't use the Onslaught ability and are able to quickly change targets. This includes Myari, who gains a big bonus from it, as he only has 2 dice base on his range attack. Sinala is a Sentinel, but 5 more points expensive for only 2 wounds. I think you typically go for the generic Sentinel here, but having the option to have a few more points is kind of nice. Bahanar is a Stone Guard with Great Hammer for a crazy 25 more points, and again, only 2 wounds. This is one I would definitely just run as a normal Stone Guard. Last we have Elathain, who is a Blade Lord but 5 cheaper, losing the reach of 2 but gaining 2 wounds. I quite like this option, although I suspect in many cases I'd probably stick to the Blade Lord profile. Overall, this warband gives Illuminate some options. They're all side grades though, rather than any obvious upgrades. Next up, the Starblood Stalkers. We know the Legerdmen are getting an upgrade in a few months, and this warband was one of the first signs of that. Although they've been out for a good few years, they already have the new design for the Skinks and the Saurus, and they look fantastic. In this warband, we have a Sorcerer, a Saurus Warrior, 2 Skinks with Blowpipes, and 2 with melee weapons. Kixi Taka is a Skink Star Priest, but 20 points cheaper. He has the exact same stats, but loses the Priest rune mark, so he loses out on a direct damage double. Instead, he gets a triple that adds 1 to the move and the toughness values of fighters within 9 inches, which is a massive range. Remember, the board is 22 inches by 30 inches, and this is essentially a 19-inch diameter circle. So if Kixi is in the center, almost all of your warband is going to get the bonus. Clackdrock is the Saurus Warrior. He's in a bit of a weird spot. As he's not a leader, his closest equivalent is the Saurus Guard. But although he loses the reach, he does get an extra damage dice and almost doubles the wounds. In many ways, he's closer to the Saurus Guard Alpha, who has that extra attack dice and a little more health. Clacktrock though is 190 points, so that's a real premium. But you are getting a hero level style fighter without taking up a hero slot. Huachi and Zepek both offer new profiles for the Skinks. They're each 10 to 15 points more expensive, but do have +2 wounds and increase the strength of their melee attacks by 1. Not sure if I necessarily take them, but they do offer more choice. Tok and Otapatl both are new for the standard Lizman list, although we have seen something similar in the Hunters of Huanchi warband from the recent Warcry box. These are both 10 points more, have 2 extra wounds, they double the range to 12 and bring the strength from 1 to 3, as well as having better crit damage. So that's a ton of upgrades. Otzapatl also gets a double for a free move if not within 12 inches of a hostile. If they were within 12 inches, you'd probably just attack with them. Lots of great options here from the Starbloods, and as Kixitaka's ability just says friendly fighters, he can be a powerful asset to any warband, especially ones looking to run move 3 fighters. Okay, time to move over to some Stormcast. First we have Steelheart's Champions, the original Underworlds warband. We have 3 classic Stormcasts, and they all share the same ability, which is a double, reducing hits and crits against the fighter by 1 for the remainder of the round. Severin is a Knight Questor, but 15 points more. That gets him 2 wounds more, but since he's not got a shield, that's also 1 toughness less, and he loses the shield bash ability. Instead, he gets access to the Lay Low the Tyrants, a double that lets him increase his strength and attacks by 1 if he's attacking a fighter with base wounds of 15 or more. It's an upgrade to Onslaught, and as he's at strength 4 already, it's a pretty good one. Strength 5 will help against the majority of fighters with high health. As he's still 5 toughness, losing the shield isn't too bad. So the question you have to ask here is whether the ability is worth 15 points. It actually might be. Oberyn and Angarad are a little easier. These are straight points increases for only 2 wounds. And unfortunately, that's a 30 to 55 point increase, basically ruling these fighters completely out. The Farstriders take a different approach. The Vanguard used to be a total menace in the early years of Warcry. The combination of tough to kill with strong range attacks, along with their use of cheap Gryph-hounds and Aetherwings for objectives, really was a winning combination. Their leader is Sanson Farstrider, a Hunter Prime with 5 extra wounds, 2 less range, for 40 extra points. He does get access to the triple, guided by the Astral Compass, which could get 3 free moves if you're playing all the Farstriders. Almeric and Elias are both Vanguard Hunters, but cost 30 more points, and for that you just get 2 wounds and 2 less range. So unfortunately the Farstriders are going to get left behind. As cool as the ability is, it's not really worth 100 points. Stormsire's Cursebreakers are the Evocators. This is a Stormcast chamber that has all their warriors are wizards, or maybe all their wizards are warriors. Either way, sword and lightning bolt. Averon is a Lord Exorcist for 25 more points. He loses 1 damage from his base melee and gains a triple that will do some targeted damage. Triples aren't easy to control the value for, and this ability is doing an average 2 per value. If it were a double, it would be quite interesting, but for 25 points, I think we'll move on. Amos and Rastus are both Evocators. Amos increases the crit damage by 1, while Rastus increases the strength by 1. But that's still 30 points each. So, unfortunately, this warband isn't really offering much beyond some great models for generic fighters. Moving over to Sylvaneth, we have Ylthari's Guardians. Not entirely sure how to describe these 3 people. I guess one's a sorcerer, one's a warrior with a big sword, one's got a big axe, and the last has a bow. They all have pretty typical human stats, move 4, 3 toughness, and 10 to 12 wounds for the fighters, with 20 points for the hero. They have 2 abilities, a double that increases crit damage by 1, which typically not great, and a quad for the leader. The leader is Ylthari. She's comparable to a branch witch, but 20 points more and 2 moves slower. That's pretty damning. Her ability is a quad, which does AoE damage equal to the quad value. Now, that could be a quad 6, hitting 5 targets, but the reality is you'll be lucky to even have a quad 1 in a game, so we can't really get picky by the value. Skaeth and Galhan are a lot more expensive than the Tree Revenant, but the Sylvaneth are a bit weird in that they've just got a few cheap fighters around the 65 to 75 point range, with the next cheapest starting at 130. So these new fighters offer a lot, as there's no one else in this range. For reference, we have the Tree Revenant, who is the cheapest option. Skaeth has 2 more wounds, but the core stats are the same otherwise. The Tree Revenant is average damage of 3, while the other 2 are both 4. Galhan is paying a lot more for that. He does get Reach 2, which helps his case, but that's still 40 more points, which is a lot. Both lose out on the Warrior Rune Mark, which gives the Tree Revenant access to Walk the Spirit Paths, an amazing teleport ability. That said, you aren't going to have enough triples for every fighter. Ounslane is almost identical to the Gossamed Archer, apart from the rune marks and the move of 10. If you check out the Gossamed Archer model, you'll see that there is a flying insect attached to the back. Ounslane is the archer without the bug. At 50 points cheaper, she's a pretty good deal. The ranged attack has even 5 more range. Her average damage is only 1.67 though, so although Ounslane is a great option, she might not get a lot of work done. So, as a whole, the Warband offered some interesting side grades, but again, nothing really stands out. Sticking with the Sylvaneth, we have Skaeth's Wild Hunt. Rather than merge with trees, these elves have gone for deer, some more than others. We have 5 in total, Skaeth the leader, and 4 relatively cheap fighters of 70 to 80 points. Skaeth is tricky to find a fighter to compare against. He's very fast at speed 8 and hardy enough with 22 wounds. His attack is only 3 average damage, but he does have an impressive 8 range. For Shiok and Carthain, like before, we're looking at the Tree Revenant as a comparison. Pure stats, Shiok and Carthain are better. They're getting +1 move, and Carthain gets +2 wounds, all for only a 5 to 15 point increase. Their damage profiles are better. The Tree Revenant is an average damage of 3, while Shiok is up to 3.33, which is a considerable increase, and Carthain is a little less, back down to 3. Both are good upgrades for the points, but again they do lose access to the teleport. Carthain does have his own rune mark, Bulwark, which opens up the triple Might of Kurnoth. Basically, he blows his horn and rallies his warband to fight harder. Anyone within 6 inches of him gets +1 attack to their melee attacks. This benefit will vary on the fighter, but typically it's best on high damage fighters with low numbers of attack dice. The best case for Sylvaneth is a Kurnoth Hunter with Scythe, who would get an extra 2.5 damage increase. Ylthari is the archer from the Warband. Like we did before, we can compare Ylthari with the Gossamed Archer, but it might just be easier to compare to Ylthari directly. Ylthari looked like a good alternative as a non-flying archer, but Ylthari has all of the same numbers, but would move 5 instead of 4, and for 5 points cheaper. So Ylthari is a straight upgrade on Ylthari. Last up we have Legain, who really should be taken by all Sylvaneth warbands because, well, pets are great. This big cat costs 5 more points than a Tree Revenant, but is twice as fast and only loses 2 wounds. The big bonus for the Tree Revenant access is, as we've said, the teleport triple, but Legain is zooming across the battlefield anyway, so someone else can use that triple. I like this warband a lot. Lots of new profiles for the Sylvaneth, which are, very usable. The last warband we have isn't from the Tome of Champions, but instead appeared in White Dwarf 477. This warband is part of the Thunderstrike Stormcast Chamber. These are the new style Stormcast that came out with the Dominion release, so a little less chunky. This team has 3 Stormcasts on a bird. The leader has a funky lantern, while the other 2 have either a big 2-hander or a bow. This warband brings 3 new abilities, with each of the Stormcasts getting 1 for themselves. Xandire is the leader of this warband, and is similar to the Lord Imperatant. She's cheaper by 30 points, loses 5 wounds, and the range attack. Her melee attack is similar. She gets an extra dice but 1 less crit. She's doing an impressive 6.67 average damage, which is up from the 6 of the Lord Imperatant. Xandire is also a little faster at 5, which is actually a big increase. She has her own special double, Lantern Astralia, which reduces the value of abilities used by enemy fighters. This is a pretty niche ability, but if you know your opponent's ability options well, it might have some uses. As she has the champion and hero rune marks, she does get access to the coordinated strike triple, which is a really good action bonus. If it was just a move, this thing would be really, really good. But you also get the option for bonus attack actions. A triple getting 2 attack actions is pretty crazy. Unfortunately, it is visible, so Xandire doesn't get the extra action herself. All around, pretty great options. You're really just trading the range ability for a more solid melee fighter. Next, we have Dora's Giant Fell. He's 35 points more than an Annihilator with Meteoric Hammer. That might seem like a chunky price, but the Annihilator is a very popular fighter because it hits like a truck for 7 average damage. Doraz is doing the same, but he's faster with 4 move. For that, you are losing out on 2 toughness, but for fighters of strength 4 or less, that really makes no difference. So you're paying a premium to get +1 move. I think this will take some testing, but I suspect that's a good deal. Doraz also gets an ability all to himself. It's a double that can force a target to take a bonus disengage action. That can be good to push a target off an objective, or to make them waste an action if they want to hit Doraz back. With the Brute rune mark, he also has access to the same quad as the Annihilator, but I'd really only use that if it was quad 3 or better, doing at least 6 damage. As alternatively, you could use the quad for Rampage, which would give you a move and then an attack, which would do the average damage, which is expected to be 7. That said, as with many of these quads, it really is a nice option to have. Then we have the Archer, Luxa Stormrider. This fighter is 5 points more expensive than a Vigitor, and has identical stat line. They both have the Scout rune mark, so she can access the triple Guiding Lightning, which will light up an enemy they've already targeted with the range attack. That gives subsequent attacks by anyone an extra dice. The damage on the bow is 3, so an extra dice is another 1.5 damage, which is decent. Obviously, this scales really well if you have multiple attackers on the target, especially big hitters like Doraz, who would get an extra 2.3 extra damage from that 1 dice. Alternatively, Luxia has another triple, Quick Volley, which will give her an extra 2 dice on her next range attack. As ranged fighters don't have access to the double onslaught, this is a really nice alternative. As she only has 2 dice herself, it is basically an extra attack. It is a nice option, but I think I'd prefer the Guiding Light ability in most circumstances, so I'd actually be happier with a basic Vigilant and saving the points. Last up we have Taros. The Thunderstrike Chamber does not have access to the Aether Wings. That's reserved for the Vanguard Auxiliate Chamber, so this is a really nice addition to the roster. Taros is super fast at 12 move with Fly, but easy to kill with only 2 toughness and 6 wounds. Unlike the Vanguard Aether Wing, Taros is considered a beast, so he doesn't get a hole in treasure or open doors. That Aether Wing also has reaction, letting friendlies reroll dice versus an enemy who's moved a little bit too close. So Taros is a little weaker than the straight Aether Wing, but even then, the profile is a brand new option to the Thunderstrike Chamber, one that it didn't have before, and that alone is worth it. Notably, this also opens up Taros to all the other ORder warbands, as they just need to take Kalthi as a hero, and then Taros is available as a fighter. I think this is a pretty great warband. Not only are they adding new and interesting options to Thunderstrike, but as Kalthi is good, all the ORder warbands benefit. There are 3 missing ORder warbands. The first 2 are Stormcast, Ironsoul's Condemners, and the Storm of Celestus. These are both easy to build kits that got Underworld cards. For Warcry purposes, they're just normal compendium fighters, and we're not expecting any special rules for them. The last warband, though, is possibly one of the most asked after warbands, Hexbane's Hunters. These came out in the Nether Maze of Underworld releases, and for some unknown reason, we didn't get any rules for Warcry. Current White Dwarf releases are for the newer models like the Loon Court, but it would be a real shame to skip the Witch Hunter warband, so I still have some hope that we'll eventually see the rules freeze. There is another Underworld warband that didn't get a White Dwarf update, and this was the Shadeborn warband. They all have equivalents for the Canine Shadow Stalkers, so this Underworlds box is more of an expansion to the warband than a Bladeborn group. I have to admit, I quite like this approach, and honestly, I'd love to see more Underworlds warbands that expand out the Warcry only factions, like the Iron Golems and the Corvus Cabal, giving them some new sculpts. And that's it, every ORder Bladeborn warband. A lot of these fighters provide alternatives and extra profiles rather than straight power, which can only be a good thing. A few are notable though. I think Elathain is a good option as a cheaper soul render, and there are a few options in his warband that look quite interesting. I really like the Starbloods, who make some great options for the Lizardmen. The Sylvanite warband also has some interesting options, but the standout for me is the Cat Legane, although Carthane with his Horn ability could be great in the right warband. Xandire's Truthseekers were designed with the current edition in mind, and it definitely shows. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible 2-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.